You can't say anything anymore. Nobody can take a joke anymore. If you've been on the internet at any point between now and 2010, you've seen someone hop onto the internet and moan about how everyone's so sensitive and you can't say anything without someone getting offended. Typically, you'll hear this from disgraced public figures who said or did something offensive or just generally socially unacceptable that got spread around the internet and generated a negative reaction. That's controversy, but sometimes controversy escalates into cancellation. My very professional textbook example of a cancellation would be the cultural touchstone, Bye Sister.
Oh my God, time and place. And you did it at my birthday dinner.
It's the Odyssean saga of controversy between Tati Westbrook, James Charles, Shane Dawson, and like everyone that was on YouTube at the time. It ended in kind of nuking everyone's careers for a little bit, but in the end, kind of nothing, as many cancellations go. And when I tell you that I love to ask people where they were when Bye Sister dropped, and I feel like most people that I ask can tell me because it was that big of a deal to us. And while I am going to talk about cancellation in this video, I'm going to focus on comedians and not influencers. And I'm not going to focus as much on cancellation that occurs because of outside actions. So like all of the comedians with assault and misconduct allegations, or just generally being rude or mean or hard to work for. I'm not going to be covering that in this video because I think that's a lot more black and white. Those are choices they made as individuals, not jokes as part of a performance or performance. In this video, I'm going to focus specifically on comedians and offensive comedy. I'm specifically interested in when a joke deserves backlash. I'm interested in the defense that a lot of comedians will use once they've received backlash for a joke. You can't say anything anymore. Often, the comedian will double down and frame themselves as the victim of a tyrannical hate mob that's trying to control their free speech out of sensitive feelings turned violent, as they so often do. They'll argue that their free speech is not being protected, that comedy itself, and them by extension, must be protected against any backlash, or the downfall of free speech and even civilization will ensue. They're saying that jokes and jokesters should be protected from intense scrutiny and backlash. And there's a historical precedent to this. They're basically calling for jester's privilege. Hi, Internet. My name is Ribsy. If you're interested in videos analyzing culture, or if you want to help a 25-year-old communications major pay off her student loans, please feel free to like this video and subscribe for more. All right, let's get into it. Jester's privilege is an idea that goes back thousands of years. It refers to the right of a court-appointed fool, dream job, how do I get that on my LinkedIn, to mock, joke, and speak freely about both their monarch and the monarch's court without punishment, which was not a right afforded to anyone of lower class. In societies where common folk would have their tongues cut out for so much as criticizing the king, the jester was permitted to openly mock him to his face, and in fact was given a special status for doing so. I feel like when we talk about jesters, we typically think of the European variety, with a pointy hat and little shoes with bells on the end, but many societies globally and throughout history had jesters. And in fact, fools were widely considered a necessity for monarchs and other high-status people, and in addition to being entertainment, served three very important purposes. The first purpose of the jester was to relay bad news to the monarch that wouldn't be well received by other advisors or members of their court. You never wanted to be the one to tell the king bad news, because if he's already having a bad day, he could just have you beheaded. So part of the jester's job was to deliver it in a way that would prevent unnecessary beatings, beheadings. According to the book Fools Are Everywhere, Jesters Around the World by Beatrice K. Otto, which is where I got a lot of my research for this video. And if you like fools, I think you should check it out. In fact, I'll link it in the description. But according to that book, in the 1300s, when the English badly defeated the French army in battle, no one wanted to be the one to tell the French King Philip. This was the jester's time to shine. He went to the king and shouted, "The English cowards, the lily-livered English." And when Philip asked him why he was saying all that, the jester said, "Because they don't even have the guts to jump into the water like our brave French." And Philip realized that he'd lost the battle. But the comedy makes the hundreds of dead soldiers go down easier, I guess. The jester's second purpose was to hold a mirror up to the monarch. They used jokes and wordplay to show them how the people really felt about them without risking offending them. This way, the monarch could just laugh it off in public, but then clean up their image before dissatisfaction boiled over into revolution, which we know how that works out. For example, a jester wanted to draw the attention of Sultan Mahmud of Ghazni to the fact that common folk were starving. He did this by walking into a banquet hall where the table was full of food and the room was full of esteemed guests, and the jester walks in and pretends to search the banquet hall, and he's complaining that he can't find a single sheep's tail. So the Sultan plays along. He orders a servant to give him a vegetable shaped like a sheep's tail, which the jester began to eat. And when Mahmud asked him what he thought of the sheep's tail, the jester responded, "It's not bad, but it's not as fat or tasty as they used to be when your predecessor was on the throne. But maybe that's neither here nor there, since the people are so much leaner now, too." This made it clear to Mahmud that while he was sitting there enjoying a feast, his people were hungry and it was a bad look. Something had to be done before discontent arose. A jester's third purpose was to speak on larger human or societal issues. They were able to show things for what they really were, making people see the ultimate insignificance of the things that they valued, or showing them that their priorities from a different angle or wider perspective, which, much like now, the extremely wealthy of the Middle Ages were lacking perspective.
I mean, it's one banana, Michael. What could it cost? $10?
And they weren't likely to listen to just someone off the street. So the jester was able to deliver a dose of reality to the very disconnected, high-status families of the time. And because the jester was given access to the court and packaged his wisdom as entertainment, his words were actually usually heeded by the elites. Despite their low status, the jesters were able to directly reform the government through their jokes. While we don't have court jesters anymore, unfortunately, I'd argue that the closest we have is comedians. Many of them come from non-elite backgrounds, but have a platform and thus exposure and even access to the rich and powerful that most regular people do not. And so their words are given more weight than the rest of us. Just like comedians, despite the jester's privilege, historical fools didn't always get a pass when it came to their jokes. At the end of the day, a jester's fate depended on the whim of their monarch. The laws don't really matter when all of the power in a country is concentrated in one individual person. So if a jester catches them on the wrong day or hits crudely on a sensitive subject, no amount of written law can save them from the wrath of the king or queen. Also, I don't want to accidentally portray all jesters as these hyper-intelligent social schemers who always knew the exact right thing to say. It just isn't the case. Much like modern-day performers and comedians in particular, the field of fooling attracted a certain personality type, people who push buttons for the sake of it and see attention as its own end. Typical punishments for a jester who failed to read the room include beatings, beheadings, or banishment. And while we don't beat comedians in the street anymore, could sometimes be warranted. Now they just get canceled. I feel like we throw the term canceled around a lot, but what does it actually mean to be canceled? In my very professional opinion, cancellation typically happens in 3 stages. And I'm going to use the comedian Shane Gillis's firing from SNL as a textbook example here. Stage 1 is the call out. This is where the behavior is first publicly brought to light in a negative way. So this could be someone making a TikTok calling out a joke, or a screenshot resurfacing of an old offensive tweet, or a YouTube video bringing to light something that was said or done behind the scenes. In Shane Gillis's case, after he was announced as an SNL cast member, a tweet went viral that basically showed footage of him using an anti-Asian slur on a podcast. In that same clip, he went on to use a stereotypical East Asian accent and made comments about Asian women. I'm not going to show it here for obvious reasons. You can look it up. It was a tough watch. Stage 2 is the backlash and boycott. This is where people react negatively to the joke, and you'll see the comedians' comment sections flooded with comments about it. You'll see people posting videos on their own takes about it and why it's bad or why they don't like it, and then you'll see people deciding to stop supporting this person. For Shane Gillis's case, the tweet went pretty viral. People started digging up other clips of him saying offensive things, and the portion of the internet that was aware of this situation was pretty upset with him to the point that a few major news outlets reported on it. Stage 3 is the fallout. You'll typically see the comedian's follower counts drop across social media, and if it's a more thorough cancellation, their larger projects could be affected. So if they have tour dates coming up, they might be canceled, they might lose brand deals or commercials, that sort of thing. Shane Gillis obviously was fired from SNL for the offensive clips, and he kind of flew under the radar for a little while afterwards. I will say cancellation is rarely the end of someone's career these days, and Shane Gillis is a great example of that. He went on to host SNL just a few years after he was fired. He's done nationwide headlining tours, put out a Netflix comedy special, and recently he hosted the roast of Kevin Hart. In fact, some people have built entire careers around being canceled over and over again, just riding the boost of outrage engagement until they can find another way to anger and offend people. And if you're a comedian who's already rich and famous, or even built a fan base around saying crazy reactionary stuff, it's really not going to impact your bottom line at all when a subset of people who probably weren't your core fan base to begin with get upset at a joke that you made. So for that reason, I don't really take the whole "you can't say anything anymore" argument seriously. It's pretty much just not true. When historical jesters did get punished for a joke they made, they were expected to take it with a smile, to laugh or jest, or make a sarcastic quip as they were beaten, hanged, or banished. The fate of the jester is always to die with a smile. Whereas today, a canceled individual will typically follow one of three paths. Path 1. They'll make an apology video or post a notes-app apology to their Instagram story and then try to immediately return to normal like nothing happened. I feel like this path sees a mixed success rate. It really depends on the creator and who their audience is. Path 2, they'll make an apology, disappear from the internet, only to return 6 months to a year later once everyone outside their fan base has forgotten why they were mad and moved on. I feel like this is the most common option, and it works pretty well because the internet has such a short attention span for controversy that you could literally make a video seeing how many puppies you could hit with your car in under 5 minutes, and the internet would forget about it within the year. Path 3, they'll double down. This is where they play the victim, say that their freedom of speech is under attack, and rebrand into this super edgy Deadpool t-shirt, I don't gaffer persona. Sometimes they'll even go the alt-right grifter route, which is, it's a whole separate video. I actually forgot that there is a fourth path, which is absolutely nothing. If you're a big enough public figure, or if your entire brand is built on saying BS on the internet, controversy can truly just not faze you at all because you don't care about the cultural impact that you have, or there just aren't any repercussions real enough for you to care. I would also like to point out that technically comedians and all of us actually do get jester's privilege in the United States. For now. We have laws here which protect freedom of speech, which is pretty sick. You actually can't be legally attacked or put in prison for saying something that other people don't like. I think where a lot of controversial comedians get confused or are intentionally obtuse is that freedom of speech does not mean freedom from controversy or freedom from criticism. In fact, due to the internet, now more than ever, live feedback is a huge part of the creative process. Back in the 90s and earlier, a comedian could get on stage and say literally the craziest thing you can think of.
My wife's meatloaf came out cold the other day, so I pistol whipped her with the back end of a broom, and as she laid there on the floor unconscious, I realized that tricked me into picking up the broom.
But unless they got backlash from a mainstream publication or news program, they were untouchable. It didn't matter. But in the year of our Lord 2026, anyone can go to Jerry Seinfeld's Instagram comments and say whatever they want. But just because you can doesn't mean you should. And I'm not saying you shouldn't critique public figures, but the question does beg to be asked, when is backlash deserved for a joke? I want to make it very clear up front that when I say backlash, I am not talking about things like death threats, doxing, swatting, or other forms of harassment. I think, unfortunately, some people are just chomping at the bit waiting for an excuse to do that to people, and it's never justified. What I am talking about when I talk about backlash is people criticizing and boycotting other people's work because of a joke they've made or the messaging of their content. So, when does a joke deserve backlash? There is this widely agreed upon idea that a joke is bad when it's punching down. Essentially, when they're criticizing or mocking a marginalized person or a group of people who's in a less privileged position than the speaker. So, like, if you're a man, you shouldn't make jokes at the expense of women. Or if you're a white person, you shouldn't make jokes at the expense of people of color, that sort of thing. The alternative would be to always punch up or punch horizontal, criticizing or mocking authority or people that have equal or more power than you, which I will say is very jester-pilled, fool-coded, if you will. But jokes that reinforce discriminatory beliefs and stereotypes are different than jokes that reference them as a way to dissect them or to show the viewers what discriminatory beliefs they're currently holding. The internet has always lent itself to people who go online, say bigoted, crazy things, and just hide under the label of comedy. And it often performs really well because stereotypes are designed to be easily digestible, and people like having what they already believe be reinforced. So some people think that comedy just means going on the internet and saying the most offensive thing you can think of, and that it's the same thing as doing the work of actually writing a well thought out and executed joke. But that's just simply not the case. And when something's on the internet, that means everybody can see it, not just your target audience of people who already agree with you. A lot of modern comedians like to think of themselves as fools, but aren't putting in half the work of actually saying anything meaningful or critical of society. They're not adding anything to the conversation or holding a mirror up to the world or speaking truth to power or even just having an interesting take. They're not doing any of that. They're just being a more extreme and visible manifestation of bigotry and then calling it subversive, which it's not, by the way, especially in today's political climate. If you have politicians that are making the exact same statements as you, you're not a subversive truth teller, and I hate to be the one breaking that news to you. Plus, criticism is an important part of the creative process. Some criticism is hurtful, yes, and it's not always made with the best intentions. But when it comes to art, criticism is a necessity. Criticism is part of thinking. As an artist, it means seeing your own work through the eyes of other people and evaluating it through a lens outside your own. All in all, jester's privilege is important. It's important that people are able to test out ideas, even controversial ones, without fear of the law or physical violence being used against them. I don't, however, think that it absolves people from criticism. In fact, criticism is equally important to an open forum as the ability to pitch ideas in the first place. It's like two sides of the same coin. In fact, I personally think that we should expect more from jokes. We should hold our jokes to higher standards, and we should all be a little bit more foolish.